is episode 68 of Off Script with Trish Glose. Intimate interviews and fun conversations with interesting people. In front of my microphone today, I have Andy Myer, winemaker extraordinaire. Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
So I just asked your title. You are a winemaker, but I don't want to be so simple about it. Who do you make wine for?
So right now, I have my own brand called Goldback Wines, and I'm the winemaker and functionally everything else for that brand.
Okay. You said you have a day job.
I do have a day job. Yeah, I work for a wine sales and distribution company called Handcrafted Wines, which is based up in Portland.
You're a wine guy.
I'm a wine guy.
Wine guy. Where are you from originally, Andy Myer?
Outside of Chicago.
What?
Yeah, west suburbs of Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah. I kind of born and raised there, and then I've lived a lot of places sort of since before I ended up here.
Are you a Cubs fan?
I'm a Cubs fan. Yeah.
That's like, duh.
Yeah,
Come on, Trish.
I mean, come on.
What are you thinking? How long did you live outside Chicago?
Till I was about 16, 17. And then my folks are actually still there. My sister was there for a long time. But I kind of got bored of the Midwest.
Gotcha.
I like mountains and forests, and there's not a lot of those in
No.
Northern Illinois.
I was just thinking about this morning. I lived in South Carolina until I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived on the West Coast ever since.
Sure.
I'll be 40 this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I still consider myself a Southern girl.
Yeah.
Do you consider outside Chicago your home?
Yeah. I mean, I guess kind of where I'm from. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not...
It formed you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 36 now, so I haven't lived there in 20 years. But it's still kind of, when people ask where I'm from, it's, it's not the West Coast. It's not necessarily from Oregon. Where I'm from is outside of Chicago.
Interesting. Interesting. Did you grow up with siblings?
I did. I have an older sister. Who's still, although actually she just recently moved to Denver, so she's kind of catching the Mountain West
Nice.
bug.
Okay. What was childhood like for you?
Childhood was great. Where I grew up was kind of the edge of the farm fields, kind of in the Chicago sort of sprawl. I was fortunate to have really great parents, and my sister and I had a pretty tumultuous relationship when we were kids. We were very competitive.
What's the age difference?
About 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 3.5 years.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What did your parents do?
My dad worked in Chicago, so he took the train every day. He did investment management, and my mom was mostly home.
That's so romantic.
Yeah, it's so Midwest.
It is. I love it, though. I mean, I'm all about, women working and doing their thing. I'm also about moms staying at home and being there for kids.
Sure.
And even, I mean, they'll probably slam me for saying this, but even being there for your hardworking hubby, you know? You come home and hand him a martini and make dinner. I don't know. I'm down.
Leave it to Beaver style.
I'm down with that. Like, I am down with both. I'm down with all sorts of different relationships and working relationships, but there's something very romantic about your dad taking the train to Chicago. It's very Mad Men, you know?
It is. No, it's very 1950s America.
I like it. So you and your sister... competitive.
Very competitive when we were kids, yeah. And
like sports, school, life?
We couldn't play the same sports, which my parents now deny. But growing up, we couldn't play the same sports because we were just too competitive about it.
Interesting.
So my sister played a lot of soccer. I did a lot of swimming.
Okay.
Our relationship got a lot better after.
Good. That's good to hear.
After we weren't in the same place anymore.
So did you guys move around? You said you lived outside Chicago until you were about 16. Did you guys hop around after that?
Yeah, my parents actually kind of stayed there. I actually went to boarding school in northern New Hampshire. So I was there for a couple of years.
Where did that decision come about? Were you getting into trouble?
A little bit of trouble, yeah.
That's always... Why did you go to boarding school? Because you were getting in trouble at home.
A little bit of trouble. I think I was just kind of bored with, life in the Midwest. I was very much into the outdoors. I went to a summer camp when I was a kid in northern Minnesota, so I kind of got a taste for wilderness.
Okay.
And there's just not a lot of inspiring wilderness in the Midwest, and so I got pretty bored. And when you're a teenager and you're bored,
you get into trouble.
Start to get into trouble.
I was bored right around like 15, so I feel you there. So this boarding school, you finished out high school here?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I did my junior and senior year there in northern New Hampshire, and it was a phenomenal school that I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to go to.
Did it straighten you out, Andy?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
it
good.
did. Yeah.
Good. What comes after boarding school?
I went to college. I started college in Pennsylvania, and I did about 3 years of college there. I was a philosophy major.
That makes total sense that you're in wine now.
But I had an interesting experience. I kind of got into the middle of my junior year, and this was about 2004, so it was kind of right around the time. I feel like there was this sort of cultural kind of thing in the 80s and 90s where it was just like, yeah, you just go to school and you get a degree, and then you go into your job, and then
sure.
you're taking the train to Chicago every day, and
Right.
you sort of fit into this kind of cultural.
Come home to your wife and a martini.
Exactly right.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
exactly right.
I
And
think I could be wrong. I think Cal Schmidt was a philosophy major.
that might be right. I think there's a couple of them around.
Yeah. And he said they would just sit around. I could be wrong. But he would just sit around, they would drink wine, and that's where his love of wine came from.
That's interesting.
I'm going to check on that, but I'm fairly certain that my memory is correct here.
Yeah, cool.
So you said going to college was just something, I mean, obviously, same for me, it was just something you had to do.
You just do it. Yeah,
do it.
exactly. And, I think that, and studying philosophy, I was studying it because it was interesting, but I had kind of an interesting moment in my junior year because I was sort of looking. Suddenly graduation becomes a thing, and suddenly life after school becomes a thing, and I'm going, philosophy major, okay, I'm not going into academia, I don't want to study law, what am I going to do with a philosophy degree?
What are you going to do, Andy?
So I actually, after my junior year, took some time off, because I wanted to study environmental science, because that actually seemed like a field I'd be interested in working in, but I also knew I didn't want to be in Pennsylvania anymore.
Okay.
So in order to finish school in environmental science, where I was, it would be 2 more years because it's a tracked program, and you have to have. There's not a lot of crossover between philosophy prereqs and environmental science prereqs.
What? There's not?
There might be the ethics of biology, but biology 101 isn't part of it.
So you take time off, what does that look like?
Working.
Okay.
Yeah, worked for a restaurant. That's kind of the first sort of restaurant job that I got, and just kind of worked and saved money. Because my folks kind of had the opinion at that point of like, you can do what you want, you're an adult, but you're on your own if you want to make this kind of shift. And that was sort of when the idea of moving to the Northwest got planted into my head. I had a friend that went to school in Northern California, and she's like, I'm 45 minutes from the ocean. I live in the middle of the redwoods. Like, what are you doing in Pennsylvania? And I'm kind of like, what am I doing? I mean, nothing against Pennsylvania.
It's well, I've never been there. I hear it's a lovely place.
It's great. It just didn't fit me. So anyway, after 2 years of kind of working and sort of saving money, I applied to Willamette University up in Salem, and that's where I went and finished my degree.
Okay. Degree in?
Environmental science.
Environmental science.
Yeah.
At some point in this, do you discover wine? Has wine been a thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of discovered it a little bit when I was working in restaurants. I think I started my wine drinking like a lot of people did when they were 19, 20, 21.
Not me. I was an angel.
21 and over, of course.
Of course.
I started with boxes of wine. I started with, I thought that splurging on a bottle of wine meant buying like Bella Sera Pinot Grigio at $7 a bottle because it came in a bottle. You know what I mean?
Classy. So wait, did you ever drink Boone's?
Did not drink Boone's. No,
oh,
did not drink Boone's.
You're very snooty then when it comes to wine.
I was a snob from the beginning.
I have a very best friend from college. She's Basque. Her dad's from the Basque country. And we would buy the glass jugs.
Oh.
Because you drink it. You have to put it here.
Yeah, you
drink it like that. Yes.
Thing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so she taught me all about wine. And calimochos. Have you ever had a calimocho?
I have not, no.
I'm almost positive it's a Basque drink, but it's half red wine, half Coca-Cola.
That I have had before, yeah.
Calimocho.
I didn't know what it was called.
I've had plenty of calimochos in my college days.
Why drink a rum and Coke when you can have a red wine and Coke?
Duh. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, college life, we've all experienced and experimented with, wines, but you liked it.
I did, yeah. I actually caught the bug. So when I moved to Oregon, I kind of moved in April, and I was going to start school that fall. And so I was looking for a summer job. And I was kind of looking around on Craigslist, and I saw there were a bunch of wineries at that part of the Willamette Valley. I'm going, oh, okay, tasting room job. That could be kind of interesting. And so I applied for a job, and I got an interview for a winery just outside of Salem. And within about 20 minutes of driving up that driveway and being at that winery, I knew I was going to do wine for the rest of my life.
Really?
It's a huge lightning bolt moment for me.
How old were you?
I was 20, boy, this would have been, I was 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about it was so lightning bolt?
I kind of moved to Oregon, thinking environmental science because I wanted to do something that was outdoors. I wanted to do something that was sort of agricultural based. I wanted to do something that, kind of had ecology as sort of a piece of it, and had science as part of a piece of it too. And wine just kind of made sense for me. I mean, it was this sort of thing, it's parts of science, it's parts of a creative process, it's part, chemistry, it's part magic, it's part community, it's international, it kind of brings sort of people together. And you can spend your entire life studying one piece of dirt and growing the same grapes in the same clones and never make the same wine twice. It's irreducibly complex. And so, for me, kind of a theme in my teens and early 20s is I get bored. And so to be able
I've
to
noticed.
so to be able to sort of throw myself at something that has that irreducible complexity just made sense to me.
Yeah. It's also old. I mean, winemaking is just so old and historic, and we as humans have been doing it forever.
Forever, yeah. for millennia.
And I mean, you I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you can't not watch Game of Thrones and not have a glass of wine in front of you.
That's right. The Tyrion Lannister, I drink and I know things.
Yeah,
that's that kind of was reminiscent for my philosophy days.
I bought a T-shirt and a coffee mug with that exact quote on it for my husband.
Oh, sure.
Because that is him.
Yep.
I drink and I know things.
Yep.
But yeah, it just goes back, and I know Game of Thrones isn't real. It's not real, everyone. Sorry to burst that bubble.
Unfortunately.
But it gives a nod to the idea that wine is it's an old drink.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, for my undergraduate thesis at Willamette, I was asked to participate on an archaeological project in Italy. And part of that project was going back. It was a pre-Roman tribe in central Italy, and they were doing this big excavation and trying to learn about this culture, because history gets written by the people that win, not the people that, it's written by the conquerors, not the conquered.
Good call. Mm-hmm.
And, they found a bunch of grape pips on this site, and they knew I was kind of into wine, and, I got asked to come over and work on this project to try to determine, get another data point for the spread of viticulture sort of through central Italy, which was fascinating.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it was also a great excuse to go to Italy for 3 months.
As if you need one. When was this?
2007.
Okay.
2007. So I went back to school in 2006 to study environmental science, but really when I was studying environmental science, every sort of step that I could, any kind of independent project or creative project was always being tailored towards wine or viticulture.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're 23, you're pulling up to this winery.
Mm-hmm.
Which one was it?
Cristom.
Oh, stop.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that place.
Yeah. It was such a great, I didn't know it at the time, but it kind of ruined wine for me in a way forever. Because before that I was happily drinking, cheap California Cab or Italian Pinot
Not
Grigio.
anymore.
And then I got a crash course in Burgundy in the Willamette Valley. And it's well, I guess I have to work in this industry now.
My first experience with Cristom was last year in March.
Yep.
And it was cold and gray and stormy, and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, kind of. And yeah, it was magical, just pulling up and going inside and then trying these wines that are like silk in the glass.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so, not to throw out that word again, romantic and magical. And I fell in love with those wines. So yeah, you were really screwed after that.
But I mean, it was such a great sort of place to sort of land, in part because the wines were amazing, but in part because the winemaker there, Steve Dorner, was one of the most patient, humble winemakers I could have, encountered. And I didn't really realize it at the time, and it turns out there can be a lot of ego in the wine world.
Yeah.
And Steve is this venerated winemaker, and anyone that's sort of met him and knows him as this really humble guy. So what a great role model.
Is there a lot of ego in the wine world?
What's the joke that gets thrown around all the time? The difference between God and a winemaker? God doesn't think he's a winemaker, but
Okay.
a winemaker thinks he's God.
Gotcha. It's one of those, how do you know a winemaker makes good wine? Because they'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, that brings me to a good point then. With a winery like Cristom that I think is, I haven't visited a ton in my life, but it's one of my tops at this point. And I think you could say this about a lot of Oregon winemakers, that there's a lot of real people
Yeah,
in this state.
I agree.
And they view it as, I'm a farmer.
Yeah.
I'm growing grapes and I happen to make really good wine. I have a team that helps me make really good wine. And there's a lot of winemakers I've met here that are super humble. Will take you right back into the barrel room. Go,
Yep.
You want to taste something?
Yep.
So I feel like, I don't know, that may exist here, but I haven't really met one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's sort of part of the stage of the wine industry kind of here, and I think at that time at the wine industry in the Willamette Valley. I mean, I've visited other wine regions in the world and worked in other wine regions in the world, and that's not always the case. There tends to be the more I might get in trouble for saying this, but the more sort of cash that's kind of behind a winery, right? If you have multiple millions of dollars and a huge marketing team and a pristine tasting room, which I don't really, I don't classify any wineries in Southern Oregon that way. There's more and more now in the Willamette Valley, but there's still plenty of really humble people that are making wine in the Willamette Valley.
It's almost like the Mondavi effect.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. It's sort of when big money moves into wine. Right, you start to, you have to justify selling a $250 bottle of whatever.
Yeah. I feel like too. Do you feel like you tend to lose your identity as a winery in that case? Just an example. When I visited Robert Mondavi Winery, and nothing against their wines or the winery, but I remember pulling up, and I felt like I was in somewhat of like an amusement park.
Yeah.
Because of the parking, and there was this huge sign that had big name musicians that were coming in, and I was just like, where are we?
You're in wine Disneyland.
Yes. So do you lose your identity as far as, when does it become more about, how big you are and how much money you're making versus what the wine tastes like?
Yeah, I think that, once you're... Yeah, I think that's a good example of a wine, not to pick on Mondavi, but they get picked on all the time. But that's a good example
Sorry, guys.
once it's more about the marketing and it's more about the brand than it is about the product. When you're starting to make products you're starting to engineer products that taste the same every year. I think that once you're at a certain scale, it kind of requires sort of doing that. And that's in part what I was so sort of drawn to Oregon and the Oregon wine industry and continue to be, is because there's not a lot of wineries that really operate on that scale. We don't have multi-million case production facilities here.
Right.
This is all still, even the larger places are still family owned.
Exactly. And I get it. The idea, you want to make money, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
you want your
make a
wines
living.
out there.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it too is, maybe that's where that ego comes in just a little bit, is you make this fabulous wine, and as a winemaker, you want to share it.
Yeah.
I hear that from all winemakers.
Yeah.
I want to share this view. I
Yeah.
want to share this tasting room. I want to share this wine with the people.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe it just gets loose from
I think
runs away from you.
There starts to be an accessibility kind of issue. As soon as you're starting to charge $50 for the privilege of tasting your wines, it's like, it's just wine.
Oh, eye roll. Oh my gosh.
It's at the end of the day, it's just a beverage that tastes good, hopefully, and makes you feel good.
My husband says it's just old grape juice.
It's it. Yeah, it's sour grapes.
Sour grapes. Do you ever see yourself getting to that point where you're charging $50 to taste your wine?
No. I mean, one of the kind of tenets for me is accessibility. I think and I've worked, basically since that sort of tasting room job at college, I've worked in the wine industry since, and I've worked in a lot of different sort of capacities. I've worked in tasting rooms, I've worked in restaurants, I've run wine bars, I was a buyer for restaurants, and I've done some sommelier training. I mean, there's all sorts, I've kind of learned a lot about wine, and one of the things that I think happens is there's sort of this cult of the expert. in wine that really makes wine inaccessible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, and don't get me wrong, experts can be really useful. They can tell you about history. They can tell you about winemaking process and why that's important. They can tell you if a wine's well made, but they can't tell you if you're going to like it, right? And, you know, I think that there's a lot of forces that are sort of keeping wine inaccessible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think once you're charging $50 tastings or you have $250 bottles of wine, you're making it inaccessible to people. You know, I mean, I think there's a balance. Like, you have to be charging enough money so that you can continue to do it and make a living. But, you know, I think there's a limit to that. And so for me, I think, you know, accessibility is something that if I ever lose that, I need to retire.
Well, I would agree with you. It was a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Oregon Wine Experience, the competition.
Yeah.
We had judges here. We had Tim Hanai here, who is in Oregon. I think he's a master of wine.
He's an MW, yeah.
He was here, and his big take home for the audience was that you have to cater to what people like.
Yeah.
And essentially saying, stop calling it dessert wines.
Yeah.
Like, some people just like sweet wine.
Yeah, right.
And we can't, you know, or white Zen, and we can't poo-poo them for liking that because
Right.
you are in the wine industry.
Right.
So you have to cater to all tastes. And I think that's why a lot of people are afraid of it, because they're just like, sorry, I like sweet wines, and they're apologizing for it.
Right. Yeah, never apologize for what your preferences are.
Agreed.
You know, I think that there's like a judgment and a snobbiness that kind of comes from that. And it's like, well, who are you to, you know, if everybody liked the same bottle of wine, that'd be a really expensive bottle of wine. So I'm really grateful that people don't like the same bottle of wine.
Exactly.
You know, and if you want to drink Barefoot Moscato, like, knock yourself out. Like, have a great time. Put an ice cube in it. Awesome. Have a great time.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think there's sort of your personal, I can have personal preferences around wine. And I'm a brand that's sort of small enough that it's like, I don't need to sell wine to everyone. I need to find people that like the style of wine that I like to make, and then find those people. And if I find someone that's not one of those people, okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's the last thing I want to hear. I actually told this story. I was in a local winery. The server came over to the table, said we're going to buy a bottle between two whites, and it was, oh, you'll like this one. I'm thinking to myself, how do you know?
You have no idea what I like.
You don't know what I like. Bring me taste of both.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, so I think if you're starting out just wine drinking, demand to experiment with wines. And I would say every single winery in our region would be happy to help you.
I agree.
Taste.
Yeah. And there's a variety. I mean, we have great variety of different kinds of grapes and producer styles and everything else. And, you know, we're still, I mean, I think that's one of the exciting parts about being here is this industry, you're still, by and large, you know, you could be tasting with the winemaker. You know, you could be tasting with somebody that's intimately involved in the process. And I think, you know, when regions mature, that becomes less and less likely to happen. So there's such an opportunity with going around and visiting different wineries now.
Yeah, take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
All right, we got off course just a
We did.
touch. It's okay. It happens here. This room, it's like a vortex of tangents. So, at Cristom, what do you do there? I'm assuming you were hired.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I got the job. Yeah,
Okay.
no.
Phew. Good.
I got the job. No, I worked in the tasting room while I was in school.
Okay.
And so I finished my degree in spring of 2008, and then I went and worked production for them. And of course, you know, during that, like summers, I was full time. During the rest of the year, it would be kind of, you know, every weekend and some odd events sort of in between. And every moment I got, I was in Steve's office, just asking him all the dumb questions. You know, dumb questions. But how are you supposed to know
There's
these
no
things?
such thing as a dumb question, which I disagree. I think there are a ton of dumb questions. But anyways, so you production, did you do harvest?
Harvest, yeah.
Okay.
So I worked harvest in 2008 with those guys. And then a couple of the guys that I worked with, a couple of the other harvest interns had just come back from New Zealand.
Ooh.
And they kind of switched me on to the idea of, you know, going down there and working. And, you know, it's interesting. I would say that probably, you know, 80 to 90% of the really important winemaking decisions happen in about the 3 months around harvest, right? In terms of when you're picking, how you sort of ferment, and, you know, all the different sort of pieces of it. And then the rest of it is, you know, racking and aging and bottling and all that kind of stuff, which is important, don't get me wrong. But a lot of the creative decisions are happening early. And, I had just finished school and was looking at, all right, well, do I go back and get like a master's in winemaking? Or do I kind of learn it as a trade and learn it as I'm, going? And I just finished school, and traveling and learning it as a trade sounded way more fun than going back to school and studying calculus.
Right, exactly. No, thank you. No, thank you.
So I got a visa and I went down and I worked in New Zealand.
Wow.
In kind of the spring of '09, because of course their season is exactly the opposite of ours, right? So their harvest is in February and March, when there's not too much going on in the winery up here, and but they need a ton of help down there. So I kind of jumped on the harvest hopping circuit.
Fun.
Yeah.
Did you work at a specific winery?
I did,
okay.
Yeah. So I worked for a Cristom Vineyard in Martinborough, which is on the North Island of New Zealand, in the spring, and then I came back to Oregon, worked another vintage with Cristom, and then I wanted to go back to New Zealand because the visa is good for a year, and I went and worked for Felton Road, which is down in central Otago, and they were biodynamic, and I got there kind of in the growing season because I wanted to learn a bit about biodynamic viticulture.
Interesting.
So I did that for a couple months, and then went over and worked in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when I think of New Zealand, I think of Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
What were the wineries you were working in? What were they producing?
Pinot Noir.
Pinot Noir.
Pinot Noir, yeah. Pinot Noir was kind of my first big love, not surprisingly, working for Cristom. Yeah.
was that kind of your thinking though, in going there, because you're learning about a grape that grows really well in our state,
Sure.
but you're in a completely different.
Totally different area with different philosophies, people with different winemaking backgrounds, different soil types, different climate, different everything. So it was really interesting to see, the similarities and the differences between the wineries in the Willamette Valley and then the wineries in New Zealand, and how they were kind of doing their process.
Interesting.
And then with Australia, I decided I needed to work with something other than Pinot Noir.
Okay.
Because I'd worked 3 vintages with Pinot Noir. I was like, all right. So I went to Margaret River in Western Australia, and their big focus was more Cabernet, Merlot, Zinfandel, Chardonnay, Sauv Blanc, kind of more Bordeaux varieties. And then from there I went to Washington and worked for Mark Ryan Winery just outside of Seattle, again, mostly with Bordeaux varieties. And then I went to the mothership. I went down to Sonoma County.
Oh boy, the dark side, everyone.
I finally bit the bullet. I'd been out of Oregon long enough that I'm like, all right, I could go work for a wine. I guess they make wine in California.
They make a little bit.
A little bit of
a little tiny bit of wine.
It's okay.
All right, we're going to hit on Sonoma, but let's go back to New Zealand.
Sure.
What was the weather like when you were there?
It was summertime.
Okay.
Which was awesome because I was leaving Salem in March, in February, when it's kind of not great.
It's cold and you're starting to grow mold in certain places.
It's getting a little mildewy.
Yeah. So summertime, is it muggy? Is it humid?
No, it's pretty similar to the Willamette Valley, honestly.
Fantastic.
They kind of have the same sort of seasonal climate where it's, cold, wet winters and dry summers. And yeah, just really pleasant.
I've only known a couple of New Zealanders, but fairly easy to understand.
Sure.
It wasn't like you were in a world where they're speaking this different language.
Yeah.
Obviously they have different words for different things
There
than
was some
we
lost
do.
in translation
A
moments,
few things.
yeah.
Okay, good. But you obviously enjoyed your time there because you went back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's such a cool country to travel around in. I think I was 26 at the time. And I would get down there, a month or two before I'd have to be at the winery, and then I'd just hitchhike around. And it's still a country that's, granted I'm 6'5" and a guy, but it was relatively safe to hitchhike in. So I hitchhiked all around the North Island and the South Island of New Zealand.
I'm just not that person. I don't think I would ever hitchhike ever.
Yeah, it was. There were definitely a couple of moments where you'd get dropped off and you're in the middle of nowhere and you're kind of looking around like, well, if I have to spend the night here, oh.
Oh my gosh, I just can't. That gives me so much anxiety. I just couldn't do that. Any interesting hitchhiking stories? I'm sure you met a ton of fascinating people.
There were a lot of really interesting people. Most of them were very, very nice. Most of them were Kiwis. It's just kind of part of the culture.
Well, you're alive, so I'm assuming they were all fairly friendly.
I made it okay.
Good.
And I was usually hitchhiking to, they've got some national parks there, and they call it Great Walks. And so I'd a lot of times be hitchhiking to the entrance of one of these parks. So a lot of the people that are going there, some of them are foreigners that were, just rented a van and they're doing the same thing I did. And,
Awesome.
the locals that are there, they're very welcoming to, or at least they were. This is 10 years ago, but, I'm assuming they're still really welcoming to tourists.
I would hope
guests.
so.
Yeah.
You were just a wine bum.
Yeah, I kind of
Just
was.
schlepping around in New Zealand.
I kind of was, killing time
it.
before harvest.
I love it. Then Australia.
Yeah.
What were you soaking up from Australia as far as wine goes?
So it was the first time that I'd worked for a larger production facility.
Okay.
So Cristom at the time made about 10,000 cases, which is pretty big, but it's kind of mid-size for William Valley. The places I worked in New Zealand made about 5,000 cases. The place that I worked at in Australia crushed about 1,500 tons, which is significantly more.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not a number. As soon as you start numbers, I sort of just glaze over. So thank you. Significantly more.
Significantly more. So
I can pick up on that.
It was interesting to see sort of winemaking at that scale, right? Because everything I'd done before that had been kind of artisanal, and know every ferment, and some of them you know by name because you call them superhero names.
Yeah, and this is massive.
This is bigger. Yeah, this is you're dealing with much larger tanks and sort of scale. So it's I think it was interesting to see that there was still some finesse kind of at that scale, but there was also some, it's more industrial winemaking.
Sure.
And it has to be. I mean, you've got a tank that's got, 30,000 liters of wine in it. If you make a mistake, or if that ferment goes sideways, that's a lot of money. Those are expensive mistakes.
More industrial, was that somewhat of a preface for Sonoma?
Yeah, that was the only winery that I worked at that was that scale. When
Okay.
I went down to work in Sonoma, I'd also kind of been, by that point, I'd been traveling for 3 years, and I was ready to not be crashing on friends' couches every time
Or
I came to town,
hitchhiking.
or hitchhiking around.
Right,
It's
I
like,
got
all right,
it.
I should probably get a job. So I went and worked. I had one last hurrah working on the Sonoma coast. I worked for Cristom Vineyards out there, and lived in a trailer 3 miles from the
Down by the
ocean.
river?
It was on a bluff, but it was
Nice.
really a spectacular spot. And then after that, I settled in Healdsburg.
Ooh.
Yeah, I settled in Healdsburg and took a job working restaurants. And I'd still work wineries a little bit on the side. But at that point, I thought I was going to go back and do a master's degree.
That's a beautiful part of the country.
Not a bad place to end up.
So pretty.
Yeah.
So you're contemplating going back to school?
Yeah, at that point. I mean, what I wanted was a full-time wine job and wine kind of making career. And, I had a lot of expertise, but at that time, it still seemed like getting a degree would be the way to really break in somewhere. And so I was going back and taking all the prerequisites I avoided as an undergrad. So calculus and organic chemistry and
Ew.
biochemistry and botany and I got offered a job to work as a buyer, a wine buyer for a restaurant in Sonoma. And, it's interesting. There was, I got a piece of advice that was probably the best piece of professional advice that I'd ever gotten from one of the guys that I worked with at Cristom. And it was, I'd been there, I think, for like a month at that point. And he said, it doesn't matter what part of the wine business you're going to work in. If you're going to work in the wine industry at all, the most important thing you can do is train your palate. It doesn't matter if you're going to work in sales and winemaking and distribute whatever. Train your palate. And the best way to train your palate is taste as much wine as you can. And so
I like that advice.
It's great advice. It's a lot of fun.
Good. But that obviously has carried with you.
It has, yeah. So that was kind of, I was weighing that as I was taking this sort of buying job and being a buyer in Sonoma County in a really popular restaurant. San Francisco is the second biggest wine market in the country, so there's a ton of wine available to taste. So I was, during that job, during the 2.5 years I had that job, I would be tasting anywhere from 50 to 100 wines a week, from all over the place. And it's just, again, palate training. The other part of that advice was it's really expensive to try to taste that much wine if you're buying it all. So try to get a job where it's part of your job.
Beautiful. Perfect. Training in the means of were you able to, the whole idea is that you can taste something and go, oh, it's from this specific region, or this is definitely this varietal, like.
Right, and kind of dig into the winemaking behind it a little bit too. So it's like, this was a choice that was made by this winery or this wine, because a lot of times, winemakers were still coming and doing these appointments. And, because I had a winemaking background, we could really kind of nerd out about the specifics of what they were doing.
Well, why does that matter?
It helped me kind of hone the style of wines that I liked and how to get how to get myself there kind of thing. Again, you're trying to, I think any winemaker really is making wines that they like to drink, because if the business goes sideways, then you got to drink a lot of wine.
You have cases that you can drink
you
because
gotta consume it all.
That's brilliant.
Part of that training was just to kind of like, okay, this choice means this, right? Like, this amount of oak means this, or doing a cool ferment versus a hot ferment, this means this.
Okay.
Kind of tying all of those, the entire sort of the different pieces of the process together. I think there's 1,000 variables in grape growing and 1,000 variables in winemaking. And the more that you can understand about each step along the way, the better you're going to be able to get closer to the finished product you want to make.
Okay. So how long are you in California?
About 4 years.
And then you decided to come back up to Oregon?
Yeah.
It was calling your name, wasn't it?
Yeah. So
she does that.
So that, I was getting ready to take my last semester of calculus before I was going to apply for the Davis program. And I watched a colleague of mine who was a winemaker for a pretty famous winery down there called Toomey, which is an arm of Silver Oak. It's kind of their Pinot Noir house in the Russian River. And he got let go from his job, and he had a degree and 6 vintages of winemaking experience. And I watched him struggle to get a job for a year. And I'm going, man, maybe a degree doesn't guarantee you anything. I worked a harvest with William Sellium in the Russian River Valley, and one of the harvest interns had just finished the master's program at Davis. I'm going, you're an intern. I'm an intern. You have a master's degree. What's happening?
What's going on here? Yeah, this is not adding up.
Yeah, so I decided to take that cash I was going to go get a master's degree with, and time to launch a brand. Just go for it, kind of thing.
Your wines.
My wines, yeah.
Wow, that's a leap.
Yeah, it was. And I was looking around. Originally, I thought I was going to do it in California, in Mendocino or maybe Sierra Foothills. But, in my time as a buyer, I would taste with all of these little tiny producers that are making 500 cases of wine. And, the wines were great. And I'm going, these are really nice, well-made wines. I can carry 2 of you on my list, and there's about 100 of you. Right? All at that kind of scale. So it's sort of, I wanted to go somewhere. Sonoma County is, there's phenomenal wine being made there. It's a hard place to do it.
It's a little saturated.
Bootstrapping. Yeah. And so I wanted to go to a region that still had phenomenal viticulture, but was just starting to take its step onto a big stage. And so looked in Mendocino, which I think kind of fits that, looked in the Sierra Foothills, and then ultimately looked in Southern Oregon. And here we are. Welcome
to Southern Oregon, everyone. Welcome. So, what year is this?
This is 2015.
Oh, man.
Yeah, 2015.
And you start Goldback.
Start Goldback, vintage 2016.
Where are you getting your grapes from?
So I use 2 different vineyards at the moment. I get them from Meadowlark Vineyard, which is a vineyard just kind of outside of Ashland, above the Ashland Airport, kind of Pompadour Drive area.
Oh, yeah.
And I get some Grenache and now some Syrah from there, and that's where my rosé comes from.
That's sort of in the Irvine and Roberts area, not.
Yeah, a little further. Further. I always get screwed up by the 5.
Don't even.
Think the 5 is northwest, east-west. I don't know. But anyway, I think it's north-ish of there.
I love that. Perfect. I know exactly where you're talking about now.
And then the other vineyard that I use is Jackson Vineyard.
Okay.
So Jamie McCleary's vineyard.
Yes.
And that's where the fruit for my red wines comes from. So I get Grenache and Syrah from him.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so you're making what?
So I make 3 different wines. I make a rosé that's from Grenache, and all that fruit is from the Meadowlark Vineyard. And then from Jackson Vineyard, I make a straight Grenache, and then a Grenache Syrah blend.
Okay. Yeah. So if people want to try your wines, where can they find them?
I'm in a few. I mean, there is an advantage to having a day job where you work in sales and distribution.
You can make things happen. You know a guy.
Turns out I know a few people that sell wine around here. You can find them at most kind of independent retail. So Ashland Wine Cellar, Harry and David, Jacksonville Inn, the Ashland Food Co-op, Market of Choice in Ashland, and then in a fair amount of restaurants as well.
Fantastic.
In the area too. And then every now and again I'll do little pop-up tastings at the winery where I make the wine.
Okay.
And I make my wines at the Weisinger facility.
With, not with Eric Weisinger, but I'm sure you run into him occasionally.
Yeah, no, we're pretty good buds. We hit it off because we'd both spent a lot of time in New Zealand.
Okay.
And so I met Eric a few months after I moved here because I was kind of just going around and meeting people and kind of getting a sense for the area. And, Eric and I sat down with a bottle of wine and just talked about New Zealand for like an hour. And
let's talk about Eric Weisinger for a hot second.
Let's do it.
He is easily one of the nicest, most genuine people I have ever met.
Yeah, and really humble too.
So humble.
Yeah.
And just a class act.
Yeah.
I've known his dad for a long time because when I was a reporter here, I've told this story so much, sorry. He was the guy I talked to. John Weisinger was the guy, was the man.
Right.
That's who I talked to about wine stories. And, speaking of someone who knows so much about Southern Oregon wine, it's that guy.
Yeah.
And he essentially started my love for this beverage and for this industry. And it's all John Weisinger's fault. But I met Eric through that. And, I would say easily we've become in the last decade or so more that I've lived here, we're pals now.
Yeah.
I just love that guy.
He's, to kind of, start my career with somebody like Steve Dorner and to be taking the next step in my career with somebody like Eric, I couldn't be luckier.
Yeah, he's just fabulous.
Yeah.
I love Eric Weisinger.
Yeah.
So you're making your wines at Weisinger's.
Yep.
What's the plan for you? What do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, at some point, I'd like for this winery thing to be able to start paying me something.
Okay, that's good. That's a good goal to have. Do you want a tasting room? Do you want your own facility?
I think so. I mean, facility, maybe. There's some pieces that I'd like to be able to control, but I think I have a lot of flexibility right now because I don't have to carry all that overhead.
Right.
And, I've worked now, this coming year will be my fourth vintage working with Eric and Ian over at Weisinger's, and we work great together. And I have a lot of fun with those guys.
And why screw up a good thing?
Yeah, I don't see the need to change it, to be honest.
Well, you're not bored yet.
I'm not bored yet.
That's the ticket.
So maybe a tasting room, but I feel like I need to make more wine before I do that. So
okay.
This year I'm going to make about 600 cases of wine. So,
versus you have been making 500?
First vintage was 3.
3,
yeah.
A little by little, man.
Little by little.
Right?
Yeah.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
I like that.
Let's talk about Oregon Wine Experience.
Let's do it.
What is your involvement specifically with this incredible event that we have coming up?
So I am participating this year as a winery. I participated last year as well, so I'll be pouring at the Grand Tasting. It was a little tricky for me this year because of my timing on when I release wines. I didn't really have anything to submit other than rosé this year because I was kind of out of everything else.
Oh.
Bad problem.
Hair flip.
Yeah, just let me...
I'm kind of out of everything,
yeah, just
sorry.
Everything fell so fast. It's such a big problem.
So you submitted wine into the competition?
Into the competition, yeah.
Fantastic.
So I submitted rosé into the competition this year. And then I do a little bit of work with the Oregon Wine University as well.
Yes, you do.
Which is part of kind of the whole Asante Oregon Wine Experience umbrella, and really a great organization to be working with.
The Oregon Wine University is, it's this little thing, as you said. It's this like little entity of all of these classes all throughout the year.
Yeah.
All centered around wine.
Yeah.
You've taught a couple, right?
I have. Yeah.
What did you teach specifically?
Last year I taught a class on rosé.
Yes.
Which was a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Different sort of styles of rosé, and we did it over Mother's Day, which was,
of course,
pink for Mother's Day.
Obviously,
very nice.
yes.
And then I'm going to do a class with them this fall. I still haven't quite figured out how, because it's going to be right in the middle of harvest. But doing a series of pairings with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
I've heard.
Yeah,
that's going to be fantastic.
Pretty cool. Yeah, it'll be pretty cool. It's a different approach to food pairing. That's for sure.
Well, and the folks that go to these classes obviously enjoy wine, but it's really for anyone.
Yeah. 100%.
Anyone. I went to the Bubbles class. That's usually right after Christmas, the holidays. Fantastic.
Yep.
I've heard the Riedel class is amazing.
Yeah.
And will blow your mind as far as the wines you're tasting out of certain kinds of glasses.
It'll make you a believer.
Yes. So there's a list of these classes. You can actually find them at theoregonwineexperience.com. But even just the event itself, we'll see you there, Grand Tasting?
Yeah, I'll be there at the Grand Tasting.
Which is Sunday.
Which is on Sunday in the afternoon. I'm hoping to be there for the medal ceremony, but I just realized I'd booked another tasting that night. So I'm going to be showing up at the end.
Such a socialite problem. I've double booked myself.
I have to pour more wine. The people are demanding my wine.
So Oregon Wine Experience is August 22nd through the 25th, and Sunday is the Grand Tasting.
It's a great event.
It's amazing. It's a little overwhelming, but don't be overwhelmed.
Yep.
You get a roadmap right when you walk in of where everybody is and which wines won medals, and you can go and taste those specifically. But if you want to taste wines from different parts of the state, this is your opportunity.
Absolutely. And, most of the tables are being staffed by either the winemakers or the grape growers themselves. So it's such a great opportunity to literally just go and ask any question you can think of.
Rub elbows with winemakers.
That's right, yeah.
With Andy Myer. Go rub Andy Myer's elbow on Sunday. That's awesome. But it's such an amazing event. 100% of the proceeds go back to Asante Foundation, the health programs, Children's Miracle Network specifically. And this money is staying just right here in our neighborhood.
Yeah, what a sort of gift and a privilege that we have an event right here in our backyard that's this caliber and this scale.
No doubt. So one more time, if you want tickets or information, theoregonwineexperience.com, and you can see Andy on Sunday.
I'll be there Sunday. Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
And you're going to enter wines into the competition in the future, I hope?
In the future, yeah,
Good.
Definitely. So I purposefully, and if someone told me this might not have been true, but I was under the impression, and it made sense to me that you enter a wine once, right? And so for me, I would rather have my red wines. They would have been, by the time the judges would have tasted them, they would have been in bottle for about 7 weeks. And that's not a lot of time in bottle. So I think they would be better off being tasted next year.
Right.
If I still have any left.
There was a hair flip again, everyone.
But
that was if I still have any left at that point.
I mumbled that on purpose. Speaking of ego.
Awesome. No, you don't have an ounce of ego in you. I don't think, Andy Myer. All right, we're gonna wrap up. Let's get to the final three.
Okay.
You kind of hinted at some advice, but best advice you've ever been given.
Yeah, that's
was that it?
Train your palate. Yeah, I still kind of carry that to this day, and it's still sort of, it informed the decision to take a job working in distribution, because our portfolio carries 1,200 different wines, and those wines are changing all the time, and part of my day job is to go out and sell those wines and, be tasting through those wines, and so I think, working in the wine business, the best thing you can do is train your palate. Taste. Really think about, what you're smelling and what you're tasting.
Okay.
And you can take that in whatever direction you want. And don't get me wrong, I don't do that. I don't sit there and analyze every glass of wine that I drink. There's still, I can switch that part of my brain off and just enjoy it for what it is, which is, again, a beverage that just makes you feel good and tastes good and smells good and works great with food.
Tangent question, which is kind of the final part of the final, but I don't care. I want to ask it. You're tasting wine all day, and this is what I ask all the judges for the Oregon Wine Competition, because I'm just so curious. Let's say you're tasting wines all day for work, for your job. Yeah. When you get home and you're ready to just be done, what do you want to drink?
A beer. Yeah. 100% a beer.
Anything but a margarita.
Yeah, so something other than wine. If you're tasting and spitting wine all day long, you need something to kind of cleanse and refresh your palate. And I think it's true during harvest too, because you're just smelling and working in wine all day. yeah, you'll drink some wine during harvest, but you're mostly drinking beer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
If you ever left this place, Southern Oregon, what would bring you back here? What would you miss the most?
I mean, I spent so much time getting here. I went to
Why are you
so
kicking
many
me
other
out?
places before I came here. It's just such a magical sort of place to be in. We're close. Drive 45 minutes and you're in the middle of unbroken wilderness. I can living in Ashland. I can be on Mount Ashland skiing 35 minutes after I walk out of my door.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think just in terms of scenic kind of natural beauty, and there's a great community of people here, both in the wine industry, which, again, there's a lot of, it's sort of at that exciting stage where there's this great kind of community sort of upswelling of people that are really trying to make this region, continue to take a step onto bigger stages. And then living in Ashland is great because yes, it's a tourist town, but one of the things that I learned living in Healdsburg, it's like, yes, it's a tourist town. Most of the parking spots are for people that are out of town. That can get annoying or whatever. But there's a great sort of underlying community of.
Sorry, we have a newscast.
Oh, got it.
That's coming. That's what that is. It's our call for an update. Sorry,
sure,
go ahead.
No worries. There's a great community of people here. The restaurateurs that I've met kind of here as well. I think the people and the scenery, for lack of a better, and the wine.
I love this question because I ask everybody that Southern Oregon question, and it just we love this place. Obviously, we're here.
Right.
We love living here. So
Right.
I just love hearing all those answers. Okay, final meal, final drink. What would that look like?
So I thought a little bit about this. Is a meal one course?
No.
It can be multiple courses?
It can be, you can wake up at 7 a.m. and start eating until midnight.
I wasn't sure if it was going to be sort of like, well, you get one beverage and one plate of food. It's
no, homie, it's all whatever you want. Go for it.
So for me, I used to do this, the place that I worked at in, kind of how Cristom ruined me for food. This restaurant sort of ruined me, especially for Italian Cristom ruined me for wine. This place ruined me for Italian food. I'd start with probably a dozen oysters, Kumamoto oysters, which are the little small, petite, just delicious little oysters. Probably drinking Chablis or champagne with that, as you do.
Of course.
And then move from there to kind of like a nice sort of antipasto plate that'll have some cured meats. It'll have burrata. A little bit of grilled bread, and then just sit there and leisurely spread burrata and Calabrian pepper jelly and prosciutto, and drinking something, kind of starting to move into some lighter reds.
Okay.
Starting to move
This is
into
fantastic.
some Grenache or some Pinots. Or you can be sticking with whites too. Then I'd probably do some more seafood. I'd do some calamari, some grilled calamari with a little bit of like lemon and some parsley. Get that nice kind of char on there too, just on a little skewer. From there, we'd probably go to pasta. There was this great short rib pasta. It was a sugo, Calabrian style sugo, and then you start to move into some kind of beefier reds, maybe some like Reserva Chianti, or and then finish with some steak. I think just a really nice big fat ribeye, just slow cooked with that, but then finish with high temp, so you get like that nice little crispy char on the outside.
Some good fat in there,
Yeah,
just kind of melts.
Just marbly fat, and
Yes.
And then you'd finish that off with maybe some panna cotta. Something kind of light, or maybe just some espresso, a little biscotti, and some. There's this great amaro that I was in Sicily a few years ago, and they have something called an amara, which coincidentally is the name of my dog. Which I didn't know this thing existed when my wife and I named our dog Amara.
Oh, I love it.
But it's this sort of more orange-infused style of digestivo that just like, even if you eat all this big, heavy food, you have a little sip of this and you just kind of...
Start all over?
Yeah, you float off into the sunset.
That was fantastic, Andy. Can I join you on your final meal?
Absolutely.
Please?
Yeah, last day on earth. Come find me.
Okay. Done. I like it. Well, you've been a lot of fun. Thanks for chatting with me about wine.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I'm excited to see your wines in more places.
Yeah, cool.
Goldback.
Goldback. Yeah,
Okay.
Goldback.
And go see Andy Sunday at the Oregon Wine Experience in Jacksonville.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, Andy Myer, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes and you like it, please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps other people find us. You can check out the video portion at ktvl.com. Just click on features and then off script. One more time, winemaker extraordinaire Andy Myer, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.